The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NBA.
An impressive OKC win gives them a commanding 2-0 series lead.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're diving into the Oklahoma City Thunder pulling off an impressive win in game number 2 to command a 2-0 series lead over the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals, cutting the wins that they need in half to make it back to the NBA Finals. They need to win 2 more games of the next 5. So let's see if OKC can pull that off. But when you look at this game, it was the Thunder just being an absolute wagon, an absolute juggernaut, and taking over the contest. It was really impressive, but it should be normalized by now. But just because it's what the Thunder typically do, it's like growing a 20-point lead on this stage is not normal. 24 points was the largest lead of the night for OKC in a game that saw 7 lead changes, 2 ties. The Thunder, kind of blew it open at the end of the third quarter and the start of the fourth quarter, clearly. But then Minnesota rallied in the middle of the fourth quarter to make things tight, and the Thunder gained control yet again. This was a situation where Minnesota, in the first game of this series, of course, losing it, but you still felt like, okay, you can still do your job here in game number 2 and get a split, head back home and feel good about yourself. And instead, like in the third quarter, this Minnesota team was outright dejected. They were outright deflated. Their body language was terrible. And if they just didn't let go of the rope completely in that third quarter, you point to that fourth quarter run and say what could have been if you just didn't let down in that third frame. Because Minnesota, really, for as great as Oklahoma City was playing, like they competed hard for 40 minutes of this game, but those 8 minutes in the third quarter really crushed them. And, you look back on that, if you're Minnesota, as a missed opportunity, because we don't know what would have happened had you not gotten yourself in that big of a hole, but you got yourself in that big of a hole because of the suffocating defense of Oklahoma City. We're going to talk about the Thunder's big 3, which I think showed up in a big way. I think that, well, it's a small sample size. They've only played in, 5 postseason rounds together so far, but this was the most cohesive, meaningful game that the big 3 have ever played together with SGA, J-Dub, and Chet. It's all starting on the defensive end. I mean, to hold Minnesota to 28% from 3 again, because you're spoon-feeding them shots that you want to live with, and you don't allow them to get consistent enough offense. I'm very interested to see what the second spectrum numbers say about Minnesota's open 3-point shots. But from the eye test, it looked like in the first half, Minnesota was able to do a concerted effort of running flare screens, getting guys, curling off screens into the corner, getting comfortable shots. But that was not a consistent approach for that Timberwolves offense. A lot of these shots were quote unquote open, but they were in scenarios that they're uncomfortable with. And that led to a lot of misses from beyond the arc. And both teams, lost in the sense of the 3-point battle. Both teams, neither one of them shot well. 28% from Minnesota, 27% from OKC. But the difference was the command in the paint from the Thunder. And Minnesota got that, they got that column tighter. And that's what's so deflating for the Timberwolves, is that their defense just was not there. And the Thunder made them pay. You cannot employ Rudy Gobert and get torn up like this at the rim and relinquish the spots in the mid-range that the Thunder love to get to and get outscored in the paint, etc. With both teams shooting bad from 3, you would hope that you'd have the better rim deterrent to shut that off as well, or at least slow it down to the extent that you did not. The Thunder shot 27% from 3 tonight, and they made 50% of their shot attempts. They made 50% of their attempts from the floor. That's just wildly impressive, as is their defense, which, if you're Minnesota, what's so discouraging is, both teams shot bad from 3. You only had 14 turnovers, which, yes, you don't want double-digit turnovers, but comparatively speaking to what the Thunder defense is able to do, 14 is a number that you take, especially compared to the Thunder 6. You lost the rebounding battle by 1, and yet this was a game that felt in hand for the final, quarter and a half for Oklahoma City. And so it's like, what's the recourse from here? Well, the recourse is simply throwing your hands up and saying, well, if you hit your open threes, you'll be able to find success. But, Anthony Edwards went 1 for 9. You would expect that to be better. Mike Conley was 1 for 4. And then you had the 0 for 5 from Naz Reid. And you hope that all those things would turn around and thus change the game. But how many times is that going to happen in what's left of this series? Can you now rattle off 4 wins from just that method before the Thunder can get 2? It's insanely unlikely right now, but a lot of this can be boiled down to the frustration that the Thunder place on teams because of their ability to have these avalanche-like runs with their defense, with again, dejecting you by the way that they can turn you over, force you into bad shots, bat around rebounds to where even if you're the bigger team and the stronger team and the more imposing team down low, the way that these little guards and forwards from the Thunder race in there and bat the ball out of your hands is dejecting from what should have been a better situation, should have been a second chance opportunity for your club. Instead, it's a fast break opportunity for Oklahoma City, and it's a transitional opportunity for Oklahoma City, which again, the Thunder dominate in the fast break, and the Thunder actually win second chance points, and they win points in the paint, and they shoot at a better percentage, and they turn the ball over less, and they out-rebound you more. They out-rebound you by more, and the Thunder get a 118 to 103 win. They did everything right, and the Thunder also had their top 3 guys show up, and Minnesota did not. Minnesota had Anthony Edwards, who I thought played even better than his stat sheet would say, but Julius Randle, was nothing in this game. I thought that Jaden McDaniels was really good in this game, but he, that's not enough, right? That's not your guy, though that Julius Randle is your guy, to where if you got more from Randle, you'd feel good. On the flip side, Oklahoma City, they got everything that they needed and then some from Chet and from J-Dub, and Shea was the MVP of this league. Shea was a total dominating force in this game.
The NBA playoffs roll on, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. FanDuel makes betting easy, whether it's picking your favorites or diving into player props, from three-pointers to steals to assists. There's so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today.
Why did Game 2 have to look so much like the Game 1 loss for the Wolves?
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast.
All right. So check this out. All the things that were extremely similar between Game 1 and Game 2. Minnesota in a decent spot late in the second quarter completely falls apart at the end of the first half. They gave up, I think, like a 5-0 run in the last 25 seconds. Bad turnover, or the Dante DiVincenzo offensive foul. Yeah, it was a flop by Dort. It was also a poorly executed screen by Dante DiVincenzo. Letter of the law, it's an offensive foul. Was it accentuated? Yeah. The Thunder do a lot of that. And it's not fun to watch, but it was smart in that moment. That was a smart play. The Wolves give up a bucket on the other end. It's a 5-0 run for OKC, and the Wolves are down at halftime of this one by 8. They were up 4 at halftime of the game the other night, but they were up 9 in Game 1 in the final minute. They gave up a run at like a 6-2 run or something to close the half, and ended up only being, however that math works out, they ended up being up 4 at halftime. In this case, it was a closer game, and instead of being down only like 3, they were down 8 at halftime. That was the end of the second quarter. Then in the third quarter, the Thunder turned it up to 11. Third quarter on Tuesday night in Game 1 was 32-18 OKC. In this game, it's 35-21. And while turnovers weren't a big issue in the first half for Minnesota in this game, they became a big issue in the second half. And as we see OKC do, they've done this to everybody throughout the year, especially at home, it completely snowballs. Just an absolute avalanche in the third quarter, and Minnesota feeds into that with turnovers, which, again, weren't a massive problem early in this game. They only had 4 or something at halftime. And they finished the game as a team. Minnesota had 14 turnovers, which, again, after 18 in Game 1, not a terrible number. But when OKC scores 22 points off those 14 turnovers, and that leads they end up with 16 fast break points overall in this game, you're just feeding into that by turning the ball over. And there were some bad ones mixed in there. Julius Randle was a major culprit. Nas Reed had a couple of really bad ones. Ant, not quite as bad. Well, actually, Ant didn't. And actually didn't have any turnovers in this game. Julius Randle had some bad ones, and Nas had some bad ones. Dante was really bad. I think he had 3 in the first half. He had like 3 of the Wolves, I think, had 5 turnovers in the first half, and he had 3 of them. So, like, the turnovers feed into it in the third quarter. OKC builds a double-digit lead, just like happened the other night. A little different in this one that the Wolves actually were able to show a bit of fight in the fourth quarter. They did end up playing small, and it was because Julius Randle had such a terrible night, and they also needed more offense when they were down by 24 early in the fourth quarter. And Minnesota got OKC into the penalty early in the fourth quarter, which is actually, that segues into what I wanted to talk about here in the first segment. And by the way, the Wolves did get it down to 10 points. It never got closer, but they showed fight, and that was good. And there's also some stuff that I think we could pull out and apply this forward to game 3 and beyond. One of them is the physicality they played with on both ends of the floor in the fourth quarter. I know they played pretty well in the first quarter of this game, and I thought the offensive execution was good overall. I thought the defense was pretty active overall late in the first quarter. They forced non-SGA players to take threes, like Cason Wallace attempted a couple of threes, and he's a good enough shooter, but you'd rather have a semi-contested Cason Wallace 3 than anything that SGA is doing. Kenrich Williams only played 2 minutes at the end of the first quarter. That was it, and they forced him into a 3-point attempt. Like, that defense showed back up again in the fourth quarter when they were already down 20 plus. And Minnesota was physical on the perimeter. They were actually getting into the jersey of Thunder players like OKC's been doing to Minnesota through the first 2 games of the series, and being aggressive on the perimeter, forcing the ball out of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's hands. And a lot of that, they actually put 2 on the ball, kind of similar to what they did in the fourth quarter, that massive comeback they had in February against OKC when they were down 24. It came all the way back and won in overtime. They did a bit more of that in the fourth quarter. And on the offensive side of the ball, Minnesota got OKC into the penalty early in the fourth quarter. And that actually led to Minnesota shooting more free throws in this game than Oklahoma City, which I never thought is a thing that would happen. And if you watched, Minnesota had 1 free throw in the first half. I think OKC only had like 8, but still Minnesota had 1 in the first half. They had 25 in the second half. And a lot of that was because they were getting non-shooting fouls, but had already gotten the Thunder into the penalty. And that was because Minnesota was actually trying to turn the corner, be aggressive on the perimeter, instead of trying to kind of short circuit, have a workaround of like, let's dump the ball into the high post and work off of that, where OKC can dig at it. And they're in rotation, but they kind of want to be in rotation. And we try to, they're going to front or whatever, and we're going to try and throw a lob over the top to Julius Randle or Rudy, and they're just going to get stripped as soon as they bring the ball down below their waist. Instead of that, how about, Anthony Edwards and even Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels, who both had success doing this in the fourth quarter, just turn the corner and put pressure on the defense. And this officiating crew, I thought, did a better job than the game 1 crew, at least in terms of calling some of that stuff on the perimeter. I should also point out, as long as I mentioned officiating, the fourth quarter was different than the first 3 quarters because, I do think Minnesota being a little more aggressive, just trying to get around on the perimeter, trying to get their head and shoulders past guys. The officiating was it was being called tighter in the fourth quarter than it was in the first 3. Overall, though, not a terrible job by the Scott Foster, Tony Brothers. I can't remember who the third official was. Pat Frayer, maybe. Better than it was in game 1. I thought they did a better job. They had more control of the game. The SJ stuff is still insane. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But I thought for the most part, that aggressiveness the Wolves played with on both ends, on the perimeter specifically in the fourth quarter, was a breath of fresh air, first of all. And while it is a little bit dicey, I talked about this a bit on Thursday's show. I played the clip from Matt Moore on Locked On NBA. He talked about how the Wolves cannot beat the Thunder by playing small, by playing their game. I don't know that I fully buy into that, because you're clear it's not working playing big. The 2 games the Wolves beat OKC in the regular season, they didn't have Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert on the floor, and they beat them by playing small. The fourth quarter of this game, Minnesota outscored the Thunder by 7, albeit in a game that was a blowout for most of the fourth quarter, basically all the fourth quarter. But they started to make some headway there, because while they're trying to play the game that OKC is the best in the league at, Minnesota's still pretty good at playing small and playing frenetically and being physical and aggressive. They can be. but they've gone away from that identity a little bit too much this year. It's not exactly the same team that was giving Jamal Murray, issues last year in the second round of the playoffs, and being aggressive on the perimeter, to that level on both ends of the floor. And again, we saw that in the fourth quarter of this game, and that is something the Wolves should be able to hang their hat on and bring forward into the next game as almost a bit of encouragement that this kind of sort of worked.
Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast.
You have to hire a new GM before you make a decision on coach. You cannot do this. So I've been here a while, and I've seen this. Kroenke hired Brian Shaw before he hired Michael Malone. Or, I'm sorry. He hired Brian Shaw before he hired Tim Connelly. Not good. Not great. Now, Tim got along with Brian fine. It was fine. There wasn't like huge tension there. It wasn't a big disconnect. But if you look around the league, this always happens. Because if the guy is not your guy, then you're not on the same page with him. You don't value the same things because you would have hired the person that you value. Maybe they hire somebody who's in perfect lockstep with David Adelman. Maybe that person is Ben Tenzer. Maybe that person is Tommy Balchutis. Maybe that person is somebody else inside the organization. Lots of options here that this is okay. But I will tell you, you cannot go from a situation where literally the problem that you have ascribed as the biggest issue with your season, not the lack of a bench, not the absence of a backup center, not the 23rd ranked defense, not a season where everyone was miserable, not the injury inconsistency, none of that. But instead, the biggest problem was the disconnect between your front office and the head coach, and then literally hire a coach before you've chosen the front office. You can't do that. You just didn't. You just cannot do that. That is, I think, a huge problem. They're setting themselves up here where if they hire Tenzer, I don't have an issue with it. Ben Tenzer been around the organization for a long time, has managed the cap, is very smart, is well respected, has done a great job with the gold. Talked to him for an interview about PJ Hall earlier this year, actually. They think Ben would do a great job. And they know each other enough to where maybe that's like in line and this new blood can be a good enough bridge, right? Ryan mentioned it. There was a lot of speculation. A lot of people thought that Tenzer was going to be announced as the new GM. That might just come as early as tomorrow. Who knows? Okay. I will tell you that I will be skeptical until I know that Stan Kroenke hasn't hired somebody else. I will say that David Adelman, in my opinion, was a Josh Kroenke hire and not a Stan Kroenke hire. I don't think it was hard to convince Stan because it would be cheaper. But I do think that this was a Josh Kroenke hire because this is the kind of move that Josh would make. A younger guy, internal development, worked his way up, shown a lot of things, locker room believes in him, basketball, like family. Makes a lot of sense. Like this is absolutely a Josh, and that's a good thing that this is a Josh hire and not a Stan Kroenke hire. That's a very good thing. But on the other hand, I would also just say if they had just been like, yeah, Tenzer's GM, Adelman's the coach, we believe in this. Like, we don't think that this was broken. We think these two guys got out of hand. And the core of this organization is still good. Okay, we can disagree. We can agree. We can disagree. I don't think it was that bad. So I could definitely be convinced to be on board with that. What I'm not going to be on board with is if they bring in a new GM, if they keep Tenzer and then add somebody above him and then bring over a consultant. When you start doing this, there's like multiple. I think having a lot of people in a room that disagree is a great approach to building any sort of organization, and including basketball. There's a lot of examples of that. I do think the hiring of David Adelman is good. I do think that Adelman is likely to invigorate the offense and defense. I think Swipo was insane about I will tell you, I think the zone stuff was completely overrated in the Thunder series. Just me personally. I just think that was a whole lot of overestimation of what that actually did. But I think Adelman did do a lot of really smart adjustments especially in the Clipper series. I thought he was a master. I thought he was masterful in that series. The players trust him. The players believe in him. That's a big deal. He hasn't given them any reason to doubt him. He's been successful when he's taken over. He was successful to end the season and in the playoffs. And one of the things that I always asked with Malone was, I said, who are you going to get? Who's going to be better? Who do you know is going to be better? And I think, honestly, a good question with David Adelman was like, who are you going to get that you knew was going to be better? You were going to have to take a chance on an unproven assistant, or you were going to have to overpay for a coach like Jeff Van Gundy, who hasn't been a head coach in this league in 2 decades. And that's a real problem. Like that would be a very big concern. You can hire somebody like Mike Budenholzer, but Mike is very rigid in his ways. You can hire a coach like Frank Vogel. I think Frank's an amazing head coach. I have like the highest of respect for how Frank Vogel has conducted himself and his coaching philosophies. Offense has never been good, period. And dot. Never been good. Never been good. I'll be very interested to see what Adelman does with reshaping his staff. That's another question I think that has as well. All right. I got a lot of the comments I'll respond to in the last segment. We got some interesting comments I want to get to here tonight. As far as Kroenke's comments, I did not understand. Oh, and I want to say this. This is a public thing. I should have been at the press conference today for both you as listeners, you as the audience, you as our community, and for the Nuggets to be present at that. I have live show commitments for the NBA playoffs that I can't break on within a day's notice. And I totally understand why these press conferences are always given on short notice. I just couldn't be there. It's not like they missed me, but I felt like I should have been there and I wasn't. And I just couldn't get out of various shows I was doing for various jobs that I do. So bummed that I was not able to be at Josh's press conference today. He always is really impressive when he talks. He always carries himself in a really great way. The message is always good. The idea of internal development, would that be in the reality of the tax situation, of the cap situation? There's a world in which this works. I will lay it out for you because I'm told I am always too negative. So I will lay this out for you. Julian has moment in game 6, right? Julian actually was tracking pretty well. Julian's is never going to be a good defender, but he will probably get to be passable. And Julian has an extremely good floor game. Julian has a really good shooting motion, and Julian has a real confidence in his offensive flow. Julian's going to be a good offensive player in this league, and he will probably wind up as a C- defender. It's fine. So that's Julian. Julian can make a big leap this year, and that can help. Peyton Watson, if he goes into this offseason and he absolutely attacks it like a rabid dog, and he comes out of it not complacent, but instead like, I am earning more minutes next season. I am going to play 25 minutes per game next season. If he takes that approach, Peyton Watson has the talent to get there. He could be a 3-level scorer. He's a defensive monster. All the offensive stuff to me is about repetition, opportunities, and skill development. Everything's on the table for Peyton. He can do that. He can get there. Jalen Pickett had some moments, can definitely wind up as like a pretty good point guard, like max out at like a starter for a couple of years for a team in the league, whether it's this one or not. I think that's definitely on the table. I would not have any problems with Jalen Pickett being a backup point guard in this league. Hunter Tyson is a different question. Maybe he can make a leap. Who knows? Like, I don't want to count Hunter out. He's a professional basketball player. Trey Alexander didn't really get a chance this year. So I kind of wonder if maybe there's an opportunity there. I don't know if they're going to bring back any more of the two-way guys. I would like to see a lot more integration with the Gold next season from both a coaching perspective and organizational perspective. They need to be sending guys up and down and back and up and really getting them opportunities to contribute. They need to develop. If you're going to develop talent, you have a team in what's called the developmental league. It's actually called the G League because of Gatorade spending a lot of money, but it used to be called the D League for development league. Go develop those players. But to at the same time to say, oh, I heard what Nikola Jokic said, and then be like, yeah, we're gonna just do internal. What if those guys don't make leaps, man? What if they're just not very good? What if Peyton Watson doesn't put it together? What if Peyton Watson can't put it together on a team with Nikola Jokic because that's not his style? What if this doesn't really get there? What if Jalen Pickett suffers an injury? What if Deron Holmes doesn't come back healthy from his injury? You've got to give yourself some outs here. You got 15 roster spots, and if you want to bring back the core 5, because it is a core 5 now, okay. But those other 10, you got to have flexibility to where 4 of them work out. You got to have a 9-man rotation going into the playoffs, and then you can start slicing guys off by the time that you get to the conference finals. But you cannot go into the season just assuming the development. That was the mistake that Booth made. And that, to me, I think is where this issue comes from. Joker's going to want to play with the best in the world. Joker's going to want to play with great players. Joker's going to want to play with a team that is good enough for him to compete with. He's going to want guys that can shoot, that can dribble, that understand the game, that can defend, that are not going to make mistakes, and that you can count on. He's going to want his guys, Aaron and Jamal and Mike, to be able to get a rest. And I just don't know if you can do this. Now, I also don't know what the trade market is. Here's a big thing is just like, and Ryan, I've talked about this pretty consistently, is when we've talked about the trades, Swipa seems to be of the opinion that what Swipa wants is he wants the Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey trade. That's what he wants, is like a steal where everybody's like, how could you, I got text messages from 3 different executives that night being like, not saying this, my words, I hate Sam Presti. How did he do this? Right? He wants that kind of a deal because every franchise, I think, wants that deal. Those are just very rare. And you have to have something like a Josh Giddey. And I don't think that Peyton Watson even is a Josh Giddey level asset. Like, look at where Josh Giddey was selected. Right? So I don't know what this entails, but I do think that going in and being like, they could also say this though. Like Josh can have given everyone the impression and said, I'm saying Josh because if I say Kroenke, it's confusing. Jay Kroenke can say, we're doing internal development, and then free agency opens up and a guy does want to come and a guy does want to show up. Bruce has already made it clear. That would be a great signing. If they can work out the money, that's a great signing. Taxpayer MLE, I got no problem with that for Bruce Brown. But they are very limited in what they can do. And I understand that. And that may be their reality. But also, if you're going to do that, then you should not be like, oh, I understand what Joker's. You'd be like, yeah, we're in a bad spot and we're going to work tirelessly to try and build out of it. We're going to work the phones constantly. We're going to do everything that we can to try and fix this.